Let's talk about Europe's exposure to Russian gas and Ukrainian throughput. To what extent should we be worried by the escalating situation when it comes down to the nuts and bolts, how we fire our crackers, how we run our power stations, and how we keep the lights on?
Well, I think the longer this crisis remains, the greater the impact is going to be on energy expectations in Europe. And we're already seeing that this morning. I mean, nothing has happened of any great significance in Ukraine other than some Russian troops showing up in the Crimea.
Yeah,
that's been enough. Yeah. Yep. That's been enough to start spiking prices and spiking future levels. And that, I think, is going to be more pronounced as we move forward. The interesting thing is what it's already doing in New York.
Right.
Which I think is an overreaction at the moment, given what's actually occurring on the ground. But as I keep telling people, this is an integrated international global market. And so what occurs one place is going to have an impact elsewhere.
They've raised rates today.
Yes.
Your read on that is a number of things, but the critical thing that you sat down and told me was that they're having problems financing exports. To what extent does this relate back to the oil and gas industry?
Oh, I think it fundamentally relates back to the oil and gas industry. The difficulty that the Russian budget, the central budget, is experiencing is that they are having an expanding deficit at $110 a barrel, whereas if we go back several years, they were doing rather well balancing the budget at $60 a barrel. Every single increased difficulty in funding export contracts cuts into what it is that the Kremlin already needs, and that is a full flow of finance.
How much substitution could there be? The polls were out this morning talking about being able to import a little bit more from Belarus. Other ways around the situation?
No, the energy crisis in Ukraine will become acute and quickly. They had no difficulty. There was an arrangement that had been set up between Ukraine and Russian Gazprom.
Yep.
And when Yanukovych had signed the $15 billion aid agreement from Putin, there was to be a lowering of price and there was to be an extension of credit. All of that's over. It's all off the table. This is now back to cash on the barrelhead, and Ukraine can't afford to purchase the natural gas. There are a couple of plans in the works, none of which is going to help them short term. They're talking about an LNG terminal outside of Odessa, but that's not going to particularly help. And the one problem that I think people haven't really looked at yet is the Ukrainians, like a number of people in Europe, have been moving more toward relying on coal to offset the natural gas pricing situation. There are some reverberations this morning from Donetsk that full deliveries of eastern Ukrainian coal might not be forthcoming to Kiev. So internally, you're having
some problems there as well.
An energy problem.
To what extent, a couple of quick questions, to what extent do you think this will refocus minds back on European fracking?
My primary situation over the weekend at our consultations at Windsor Castle was to update people on international fracking, on the advantages and disadvantages, and on the politics attending it. To the extent that one can pose objectively and resolve the major environmental issues, and we're just about there now, it is a no-brainer if you have domestic sources of unconventional gas. Those domestic sources of unconventional gas will establish the foundation for a lower overall pricing, and that has an advantage. And
presumably reduce the risk of being exposed to others.
Absolutely, absolutely, which is exactly, of course, when the United States starts talking about being self-sufficient in energy by 2030, it's essentially because of this domestic largesse. Now, having said that, there are some places where you should not frack. There are some places where the geology, where the seismic activities, where the locations of the water table, et cetera, simply say this isn't so it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.